10 years had passed since I last walked the halls of Easton High, a place that once felt too small to contain the size of my dreams. I wasn't the same girl who used to eat lunch in the robotics lab, sketching out neural networks in the margins of her notebook while pretending not to hear the snickers from across the room. Back then, I kept to myself, painfully shy, socially invisible, the kind of girl whose name was only remembered if someone needed help with their calculus homework. But tonight, everything was supposed to be different. The reunion was held at the Viridian, a sleek glass and steel hotel in downtown Austin that screamed money and success, the very things I had fought for tooth and nail. I spent hours picking out my outfit, making sure I looked professional but elegant, composed but confident. My dark blue silk dress fit just right, and I had my hair styled the way I always dreamed of back in high school but could never afford. I arrived alone, by choice, stepping out of a black car provided by the company that now bore my name in patent filings. I wasn't just attending to show off, at least that's what I told myself. A part of me needed to see if all those years of quiet suffering had paid off. If becoming someone actually changed anything. The moment I walked into the ballroom, a familiar wave of discomfort washed over me. There were clusters of people in shimmering dresses and tailored suits, laughing too loudly, clinking champagne glasses, making the kind of superficial small talk that high school never quite prepares you for. The lighting was soft but theatrical, casting gold reflections off the massive crystal chandelier that hung like a crown above everyone's heads. I moved slowly through the crowd, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, trying to spot a familiar face. I wasn't expecting a hero's welcome, but I also didn't expect what happened next. That voice. I recognized it before I even saw him. Aiden. My brother. He was standing on the small stage near the DJ booth, holding a mic in one hand and a whiskey in the other, clearly mid-speech. His voice had the same cocky rhythm I remembered, the one he used when he wanted everyone to think he was the funniest guy in the room. And a crowd was eating it up. So there was this one girl, he was saying, laughing as he paced slowly across the stage, who used to sit by herself in the robotics lab, you know the type. Glasses, notebook full of gibberish equations, convinced she was gonna revolutionize artificial intelligence or some crap. Real Einstein stuff. A burst of laughter rippled through the room and I froze. The glass of champagne I had just accepted from a passing server trembled slightly in my hand. Aiden continued, not realizing I had arrived, or maybe he did. Anyway, last I heard, she moved to California or something? Working on robots? Probably talking to toasters and calling it progress. More laughter. Louder this time. My chest tightened. It wasn't just a jab. It was a surgical strike, and it landed right in front of 100 people who had known me back when I was too afraid to speak in class. I stood perfectly still, watching my older brother humiliate me without a flicker of hesitation, without even the decency to use a fake name. He was still the same. Always the loudest voice in the room. Always playing to the crowd. Aiden had been popular back then, quarterback, prom king, the golden boy everyone loved. And me? I was the weird little sister he went out of his way to avoid in public. At home, he was never cruel outright, but he also never stood up for me. Not when people mocked me for my clothes. Not when someone glued my locker shut. Not when I cried silently at the dinner table after being called a freak. Silence was his form of betrayal. I wanted to say something, to walk up there and tear the mic from his hand, to correct every lie and twist his joke back at him with perfect, surgical precision. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I took a deep breath and walked further into the ballroom, past the people who had just laughed at me without realizing I was there. A few heads turned as I passed, recognition flickering in their eyes, curiosity sharpening their expressions. I locked eyes with Melissa Trent, the former student council president, who looked at me like she had just seen a ghost dressed in designer silk. She whispered something to the guy beside her, and he turned to look too. Aiden finally noticed me. Or maybe he had noticed all along and just waited for the right moment. His eyes flicked from my face to the logo stitched into the sleeve of my coat, Hyperion Systems. The silence that followed stretched just a little too long. He cleared his throat, let out a soft chuckle, and said, "Well, look who decided to show up." He smiled, that same smug, performative grin he wore in every yearbook photo. I didn't smile back. Instead, I lifted my glass slowly, met his eyes without flinching, and took a long, deliberate sip. Let them watch. Let them remember every time they ignored me, mocked me, dismissed me. I wasn't here to make a scene. But I wasn't here to be small anymore either. His voice thundered through the ballroom like a slap across the face, amplified by the mic and coated with that effortless arrogance he'd always worn like cologne. She thought some Python scripts would change the world, turns out she's just average, doing grunt work in tech. His words, casual and cruel, sliced through the air with surgical precision, designed not just to mock, but to reduce. It wasn't enough for Aiden to insult me, he had to strip me down in front of everyone who ever rolled their eyes when I raised my hand too eagerly in class or carried around a laptop bigger than my backpack. The laughter came fast, unfiltered, mean. It rolled through the crowd in a wave, raw and immediate, and every burst of it felt like a blade to the skin. I felt it in my spine, in my stomach, in the quick flash of heat that rushed up my neck. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass as if anchoring myself to the one thing I could still control. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I let it hit me in full force because I needed to feel it, all of it, to remind myself of who I used to be and how far I'd come. He didn't know. He had no idea. He had no clue what I had in my bag, a simple leather clutch, understated, elegant, the kind of thing no one would ever guess held anything more than a phone and a few business cards. But nestled inside, tucked into a custom-milled aluminum case, was a titanium-encrypted solid-state drive no bigger than a matchbox. And on it? Everything. 3 years of quietly gathering evidence. Years of watching, listening, tracing transactions, unspooling networks that Aiden thought he'd buried so deeply no one would ever find them. Shell companies in Panama. IP reroutes through servers in Prague. Stolen data packets masked as harmless XML logs. Insider trades that spiked moments before confidential product launches. False statements filed under burner identities. His whole empire, built on a foundation of fraud and smoke. I didn't need to dream of changing the world anymore, I already had. My work at Hyperion Systems had revolutionized the architecture behind AI inference modeling, but that wasn't the point. That wasn't why I was here. That wasn't why I'd flown across the country and walked into this ballroom in the first place. I came because tonight was about justice. Not for the industry. Not even for the world. For me. Aiden had always been the kind of man who thought consequences were for other people. In high school, he never got caught cheating on tests because he had teachers wrapped around his finger. In college, he got arrested for driving under the influence and walked away with a warning because the sheriff had been his football coach's cousin. He thought charm and confidence could buy his way out of anything. And for a long time, he was right. But not this time. I watched him on that stage, strutting like a second-rate comedian performing for an audience of half-drunk nostalgia junkies, all too eager to relive their glory days at someone else's expense. He thought he was in control. He thought the laughter gave him power. He couldn't see the noose slowly tightening around his reputation, his career, his freedom. And what made it worse, what made it truly pathetic, was how hard he needed that laugh. That validation. That attention. It wasn't about me, not really. It was about proving to himself that he was still the star, that he hadn't peaked 10 years ago in a high school gymnasium full of streamers and plastic trophies. He needed to believe that he still mattered. That I hadn't surpassed him. That I hadn't become the person he could never be. He thought I was average. He said it like a final judgment, like an absolute truth delivered from on high. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the documents I carried contained a full timeline of his activities, cross-referenced with source logs, third-party testimony, and a paper trail that led straight to his office door. I had every forged signature, every falsified report, every time-stamped message confirming his involvement. I had built the case line by line, the same way I used to write code when I was 16, meticulous, quiet, invisible until it changed everything. The real power in that room didn't come from the stage, or from the mic, or from the cheap laughs of people too scared to grow past their teenage selves. It was in the silence I carried. In the knowledge I held. In the truth I'd spent years preparing, just waiting for the perfect moment. So I let him finish. I let him ride the wave of his own ego, surrounded by the people who still saw him as the golden boy. I watched his smirk widen with each cruel word, and I said nothing. Because soon, very soon, Aiden wouldn't be able to laugh his way out of what was coming. Not with charm. Not with connections. Not with all the arrogance in the world. And when it happened, when everything finally crashed down around him, he wouldn't even see me coming. 3 nights before the reunion, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the soft glow of my monitors and the low hum of the servers I kept running for personal projects. I had been preparing for an upcoming promotion audit, a standard internal process at Hyperion Systems where engineers up for senior-level roles had to account for their contributions, cross-reference logs, and verify their digital footprint across company infrastructure. It was a meticulous process, but I'd done it before. I wasn't worried. I ran a deep scan of all activity linked to my employee ID, expecting to find the usual logs from Project Tensor 19 and a few auxiliary commits to the open-source ARM. What I didn't expect was the alert that popped up in red, indicating an IP conflict with an external domain. At first, I assumed it was just a routing issue, maybe a misconfigured API key pinging our test environment. But something about the address looked off. It was registered to a private server located in Nevada, rerouted through a handful of low-security proxies. When I tried to trace it further, I hit a firewall. That's when my instincts kicked in. I launched a separate environment, masked my IP, and ran a deeper diagnostic using tools I normally reserved for penetration testing. The system spit out a name I hadn't seen in over a year, Orion AI. My pulse quickened. Orion AI was a startup I vaguely remembered hearing about in passing, one of those overhyped ventures that raised a ridiculous amount of capital without any visible output. I remembered seeing Aiden post about it on LinkedIn, bragging about his role as founder and chief strategist. I never paid much attention, assuming it was just another one of his attempts to chase relevance. But now that name was appearing in a conflict log connected to my credentials. I clicked through, pulled the ownership records, and felt the air drain from my lungs. There it was. My full name. Dr. Evelyn Carter. Listed as Chief Technology Officer of Orion AI. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Not just my name, my university degrees, my headshot from a company bio page, and even a forged digital signature. It was all there. Someone had built an entire professional profile for me, complete with a fabricated resume that cited non-existent work I'd supposedly done for Orion AI. The public company page showed me as part of the founding team, involved in early-stage architecture design, regulatory compliance, and systems modeling, none of which I had ever touched. I immediately pulled the metadata from the site. The image was scraped from an old Hyperion conference where I'd given a keynote on federated learning systems. The signature had been lifted from a white paper I published 2 years ago on synthetic inference models. Every piece of it was carefully stolen, stitched together to build the illusion that I had helped Aiden launch Orion AI. I should have felt panic. Maybe even fear. But what I felt was fury. This wasn't just identity theft. This was strategic. Deliberate. Someone, Aiden, had used my reputation, my hard-earned credentials, to legitimize his operation. I ran background checks on Orion AI's filings, digging into their investor packets and SEC documents. In every official record, I was listed as CTO, with an annual salary, stock options, and multiple signed attestations. All of it was fake. But it was enough to make things look real. No wonder he was so bold on stage. No wonder he spoke about me like I was nothing, because to him I wasn't a person anymore. I was a resource. A useful name. A set of letters behind a fake title to impress investors and regulators. He hadn't just insulted me, he had built a fraudulent company using my identity as its foundation. As I kept digging, more pieces fell into place. Orion AI had raised over $32 million in Series B funding. They had secured 2 government research grants, supposedly based on my expertise and technical leadership. My forged signature was on the grant applications. My name was listed in the source code credits for a product that didn't exist. It was a paper empire, held together by a web of lies and my reputation. I knew I couldn't confront him directly, not yet. This went deeper than a simple scam. There were layers to this. Orion's codebase repositories were private, but I flagged a few access tokens buried in their dev logs. I cloned everything I could, pulling down compressed files, encrypted containers, system images, anything that might explain what they were doing and how far it had gone. By the time I closed my laptop at 3:30 in the morning, I had over 800 gigabytes of data, including financial records, internal Slack logs, NDAs with suspicious timestamps, and a series of emails sent from an account I knew belonged to Aiden, all of them referencing my role, my name, my supposed approval of decisions I had never seen. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, replaying every moment of our childhood, every time he'd talked over me, every time he dismissed my work, every time our parents had brushed it off like harmless sibling rivalry. This wasn't harmless. This was theft at the highest level, of identity, of credibility, of years of my life I had poured into building something real. That was the moment I decided the reunion wasn't going to be a night to reminisce. It was going to be the beginning of the end for Aiden. The deeper I went, the uglier it got. What started as a strange IP conflict had unraveled into something so staggering, so brazenly corrupt, that I had to pause more than once just to process the scale of it. I traced the fraudulent use of my identity back to a $5 million series of funding round, closed nearly 16 months earlier. It wasn't just that my name had been used to add credibility to Orion AI's leadership team, that alone would have been enough to trigger criminal charges. But what I discovered next made my hands tremble with a fury I hadn't felt in years. In the investor pitch deck submitted to at least 3 VC firms, Polaris Ventures, Crimson Capital, and a third that was redacted in the exported PDF, there was a supposed proprietary algorithm credited to me directly. It was being sold as a revolutionary breakthrough in AI-assisted spatial recognition systems, something that Orion AI claimed would transform adaptive drone logistics. I knew the language. I knew the math. Because I wrote it. Not for them, for MIT. I opened the technical appendix attached to the pitch. The so-called novel patent was word for word a section of my doctoral thesis, completed during my final year of the MIT Fellowship, published under restricted access to protect pending intellectual property filings for Hyperion systems. It wasn't just similar, it was identical. The model architecture, the optimization path, the theoretical benchmarks, even the spelling errors in a couple of my early notes had been preserved. Whoever had converted the text into a patent application had lifted the entire body of research directly from the version I submitted to the MIT internal server. Not a single equation had been altered. When I pulled the patent metadata, I saw my name listed as the sole inventor, with Orion AI as the owning entity. I stared at the digital document in disbelief. This wasn't just intellectual theft. This was a weaponization of my work, an attempt to anchor a fraudulent company with the illusion of legitimate innovation, using credentials I had spent over a decade building. But the insult didn't stop there. The signature on the application was laughable, a low-resolution bitmap image that had clearly been generated using some third-rate e-signature software. It lacked the biometric cadence that modern verification tools rely on. The tilt of the letters was wrong. The pressure points inconsistent. It didn't even match the digital watermark embedded in my actual signature, something Hyperion's legal team requires on all sensitive documents. Anyone who looked for more than a second would see it was fake. But no one had. Or worse, no one cared. The abstract of the patent hadn't even been edited. It was still formatted in the original LaTeX I had used during my research submission, complete with an outdated citation for a 2019 conference in Berlin that I never ended up attending. They hadn't tried to adapt it, modernize it, or even recontextualize it within a commercial framework. They just took it, slapped my name on it, attached a shell company, and fed it to investors too blinded by buzzwords and early returns to notice the rot. I examined the filing history and saw that the submission had occurred 4 days after a documented breach on the MIT Research Archive, a breach that had been dismissed at the time as a failed bot scraped from a foreign IP. Now, I knew better. It was Aiden. Or someone working for him. He'd known where to look, what to take, and how to make it seem official enough to avoid immediate scrutiny. And the timing, the funding round, the patent filing, the company incorporation, all of it lined up with the period when I had been working overtime at Hyperion, too distracted by launching our Nexus prototype to notice anything amiss in the broader AI landscape. I was pouring myself into something real, something that was going to change how neural nets operated across distributed systems, and meanwhile, Aiden had been out there peddling my stolen research like a con man selling forged Picasso prints in an alley. I combed through the cap table. The funding had come from recognizable names, firms with real capital and, presumably, real due diligence processes. Yet none of them had flagged the fact that Orion AI's supposed CTO had no public interviews, no conference appearances, no LinkedIn posts, no press mentions, nothing. I didn't exist in their world, except on paper. And that paper was a lie. It became sickeningly clear, Aiden had built Orion AI around me, or at least around the illusion of me. He'd known that having a woman CTO with a research pedigree from MIT and leadership experience at one of the top AI firms in the country would be irresistible to investors hungry for the next big thing. He had manufactured my presence like a brand, hollow and polished, without ever having to involve me. I felt violated in a way that was hard to describe. It wasn't just my work, it was my identity, reduced to a bullet point on a fake pitch deck, used as collateral in a financial con I never agreed to be a part of. Everything I had built through years of relentless study, humiliations, trial and error, late nights, and failed experiments had been appropriated, misrepresented, and sold to the highest bidder. And it wasn't a stranger who did it. It was my own brother. And he thought I wouldn't find out. The night after I uncovered the full extent of the fraud, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the terminal on my laptop as lines of compiled evidence flickered down the screen. I had every piece I needed: forged patent documents, falsified employment records, internal communication threads, even a timestamped server log from the night the MIT archive was breached. Everything pointed to Aiden. Every file, every connection, every lie was tied directly to him. But there was one question I still couldn't let go of: no matter how deep into the data I went, how had he pulled this off without anyone stopping him? That question kept looping in my mind, grinding against my nerves with growing intensity until I couldn't ignore it anymore. There was only one way to get an answer I couldn't find in the code: I had to ask them. So I called my mother. The line rang twice before she picked up, her voice light, cheerful, like she was answering a call from an old friend instead of her only daughter unraveling under the weight of betrayal. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, as if nothing were wrong. I didn't waste time. My voice was steady, clipped, already tired from the weight of everything I was holding. "Why is my name on legal filings for Aiden's company?" There was a pause, not of confusion, but of recognition. And then, in the same breezy tone, she said, "Oh, honey, Aiden just needed a little help getting his business off the ground." Just like that. Like it was nothing. Like the calculated theft of my identity, my work, and my career was some kind of harmless sibling favor. I gripped the edge of the countertop with my free hand, forcing myself to breathe. "Help?" I said, incredulous. "You think forging federal documents, stealing my research, and falsifying patents is help?" She sighed, and I heard the rustle of her settling into one of the kitchen chairs back at their house in Colorado. "You always get so dramatic about these things," she said. "He was just trying to show investors that he had the right team." "Your family. What's the big deal?" Before I could respond, I heard my father's voice in the background. He must have picked up on the other line. His tone was harder, colder, the way it always got when he felt like I was stepping out of line. "You always overreact, Emily. This isn't some conspiracy. Just withdraw your name and shut up." My jaw clenched so tight it ached. "You knew. You both knew, and you let him do it." "You weren't using that patent," my dad said flatly. "You were sitting on it. Aiden actually did something with it." "Something illegal," I snapped. "He committed federal crimes using my name. Do you understand that? He stole grant money. He fabricated documents. And what good would it do anyone if you blow this up now?" My mom cut in again, her voice sharpened by that passive-aggressive edge she reserved for moments when I didn't fall in line. "He's already raised the money. He has employees. Real people depend on him now. If you go public with this, you're going to destroy everything." The silence on my end wasn't just shock, it was something deeper, something heavier. I wasn't speaking to people who had been misled or manipulated. I was speaking to co-conspirators. They hadn't just known about it. They had been part of it. "You let him use me," I said slowly, the words bitter in my throat. "You let him build a lie around me, and now you expect me to pretend it didn't happen so he can keep cashing checks." "He's your brother," my dad said. "You don't throw family under the bus." I laughed, but it wasn't joy, it was disbelief. "He threw me under the bus the second he put my name on those patents without asking. The second he used my face to secure funding." "You think that's loyalty?" "You think you're so special," my mom muttered, just low enough that she probably didn't mean to say it out loud. "Just because you went to MIT and work at some tech firm, doesn't mean you're better than him. He needed this." And there it was. The root of it, naked and blunt. They didn't just excuse what he did, they believed he deserved it. That he had a right to what was mine because they never saw me as the rightful owner in the first place. Not really. I was always the quiet one, the one buried in books, the one they never quite knew what to do with. Aiden was their pride, their son who could work a room, who shook hands with politicians, who looked good in photos. I had built my future one line of code at a time, and he had taken it with a forged signature and a smirk, and they were fine with that. More than fine, they wanted me to protect him. "You're not asking me to stay quiet for the family," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "You're asking me to take the fall." No one answered. "I won't," I said. "I won't lie for him. I won't shield him. You made your choice when you let this happen." I ended the call before they could reply, my hand shaking as I placed the phone face down on the table. The silence in the room felt suffocating, thick with betrayal and the echo of every time I had told myself that things weren't as bad as they seemed growing up. That maybe my parents just didn't understand me. But they had understood enough to know what they were doing. And now I understood too. They hadn't just failed to protect me. They had sacrificed me. Willingly. I didn't sleep that night. After the call with my parents, I sat in the dark for a long time, the quiet hum of my apartment broken only by the whirring of my laptop's cooling fans and the low buzz of fluorescent kitchen lights I'd forgotten to turn off. The weight of what I had uncovered, the depth of the fraud, the personal betrayal, and now the confirmation that my own family had enabled it, pressed against me like a physical force, heavy and suffocating. But beneath the anger, beneath the numb exhaustion, something had shifted. The decision wasn't emotional anymore. It wasn't about hurt feelings or family dysfunction. It was strategic. Cold. Necessary. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. I grabbed my keys, shoved the encrypted drive into the inner pocket of my coat, and walked out into the night. The city was quiet, cloaked in that strange stillness that only exists between 2 and 4 in the morning, when even the late-night crowds have thinned and the streets feel post-apocalyptic. The cold air bit at my cheeks as I slid behind the wheel of my car and pulled out of the parking garage, the glow of streetlights tracing long shadows across the dashboard. Hyperion Systems headquarters sat on the north edge of downtown, a sleek, glass-paneled building with motion-triggered lighting and 24-hour security. The lot was empty when I arrived, as expected. I keyed in through the employee entrance, passed the biometric scanner, and took the elevator to the 6th floor. The security team barely looked up from their monitors as I walked by. They were used to seeing me at odd hours. I was the kind of person who ran simulations at 2 in the morning just to shave a few milliseconds off inference time. No one questioned it. I texted Ryan on the way up. One sentence, *need you in the war room. Now, *. He was already in his office when I got there, a half-eaten energy bar on his desk and 2 empty Red Bull cans beside his keyboard. Ryan Kavanaugh, Hyperion Cybersecurity Director, had a permanent 5 o'clock shadow and the kind of haunted eyes you only earn after years of battling data breaches and corporate espionage. He didn't ask questions when he saw me. Just stood, grabbed his laptop, and followed me into the incident response center we called the War Room, a glass-walled meeting space outfitted with its own network, air-gapped terminals, and an entire wall of active threat maps. I plugged the drive into the secure port, entered my decryption passcode, and sat across from him as the data loaded. Line by line, I walked him through everything, the forged patent, the falsified company filings, the internal emails, the shell accounts, the use of my name and credentials, and the discovery that Orion AI had leveraged my work to raise millions in venture funding. I didn't hold anything back. This wasn't just a personal crisis anymore, this was a breach of national research protections, with potential implications for AI defense contractors, grant oversight, and federal compliance audits. Ryan said nothing for a long time. His fingers moved over the keys with mechanical precision as he cross-checked file hashes, opened logs and hex editors, and pulled header data from the patent application. When he finally leaned back in his chair and looked at me, his face had lost all trace of casual professionalism. "This isn't just fraud," he said, his voice low and razor-sharp. "This is federal prison-level fraud." He turned the screen toward me, highlighting a timestamp buried in one of the fake employment contracts. "You see this? This is a forged federal grant authorization. He used your name to receive Department of Energy funding for AI infrastructure testing. That's not just private investor money. That's government money. That means federal charges." I nodded once, tightly. "I know." He kept scrolling. "And this email chain, this one here is enough for conspiracy. Internal acknowledgement of your role, reference to placeholder credentials, and one guy even jokes about how you'll never find out. Jesus Christ, Emily. He pushed his chair back from the table, ran a hand through his hair, and let out a breath that sounded more like a warning than an exhale. This goes way past a civil suit. If we take this to the feds, it won't just be your brother who goes down. This is going to trigger an investigation into every investor, every subcontractor, and every grant approver who touched Orion AI's application files. The fallout's going to be massive. I didn't flinch. Good. Ryan studied me for a second. You sure about this? Once we submit this, you don't control what happens next. You're not filing a complaint. You're detonating a bomb. I looked him dead in the eye. Then we'd better make sure it hits the right target. He gave a slow nod, then turned back to his screen and began segmenting the data into secure folders, tagging evidence for chain of custody and initiating an internal forensic report under the company's legal protection protocol. I signed off on every transfer, knowing that once this began, there would be no turning back. That night, as I sat in the war room under the cold glare of LED lights, watching the logs compile and the evidence map take shape on the display wall, I felt no fear. No guilt. Only clarity. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even personal anymore. It was accountability. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally in control. It was just after 6 in the morning when Ryan found it, the kind of discovery that immediately changes the temperature of a room. I had barely moved from my spot in the war room since we began the forensic investigation hours earlier, my eyes bloodshot and locked to the stream of decrypted files scrolling across the screens. I was running on muscle memory and adrenaline by that point, my body too tense for fatigue to fully settle in. Ryan was at the far terminal, headset off, hunched forward, his fingers frozen mid-keystroke as he stared at something on his screen. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. It was thick. Charged. He didn't turn around. His voice came flat and low. We've got it. I stood immediately and crossed the room in seconds, my heart pounding hard in my chest. Ryan tapped the screen gently and stepped aside, giving me a full view of the email thread he had pulled from a shadow copy in Orion AI's internal comms server, a folder Aiden probably thought had been scrubbed during their last audit cycle. But nothing is ever truly deleted. Especially not when it's routed through Slack-integrated cloud storage with poor lifecycle encryption. There it was. The subject line was nondescript, urgent, filing adjustments. But the body of the email was crystal clear. Aiden had written it to Blair Monroe, his executive assistant, or more accurately, his personal fixer, based on what we'd already found in prior emails. The message was timestamped precisely 3 hours before the patent submission was logged into the federal IP system. No ambiguity, no vague language, no plausible deniability. He wrote, "Hey, I need you to pull Emily's old photo from the MIT PR kit and use it for the Orion docs. Same with her e-signature from the Hyperion white paper, doesn't need to match exact, just make it look official. Set the submission location to Miami. Use the VPN if needed, make sure the metadata reflects that location. Timeline needs to show it came from June 9th. That'll line it up clean with the Series A timeline. Don't overthink this, she's always off-grid when she's traveling. She won't notice." My throat went dry as I read it. Miami. June 9th. He wanted the signature to look like it was submitted domestically, in his jurisdiction, just days before the round closed. But I wasn't in Miami on June 9th. I was in Zurich, inside one of the deepest cold data facilities in Europe, consulting with a multinational research group on zero-latency failover systems. The center had no Wi-Fi. No cell signal. I was physically unreachable, by design, for 72 hours. Ryan scrolled down, revealing Blair's reply, which landed 31 minutes later. Got it. Pulled the image and traced the signature from the .pdf you mentioned. Metadata patched. Submission now logs as Miami via VPN IP. Patent doc and compliance forms updated and stored in /intl/cto_filing_MIA. Let me know if you need anything else. B. There was no room for interpretation. Aiden hadn't just benefited from the lie. He had orchestrated it. He had issued a direct instruction to falsify a federal document, forge a digital identity, and falsify geographic data to cover the fraud. The mention of VPN use was especially damning, proof of intentional masking, not a clerical error or miscommunication. This wasn't sloppy. This was premeditated. I leaned in closer and checked the email headers for verification. Everything matched. Authenticated internal server. TLS protected. Proper DKIM signatures. This wasn't spoofed or fabricated, it was real. Ryan looked at me from the side, his face grim. This is your silver bullet. He was right. This was the golden email. The one piece of direct, indisputable evidence that tied every forged document, every stolen patent, and every dollar of misappropriated funding back to Aiden. With this, there was no way he could claim ignorance or blame a subordinate. He had given the order. He had supervised the execution. And he had done so knowing I was unreachable, assuming, maybe even counting on, the fact that I'd never be able to prove where I was. But I could. I still had the Zurich facility's badge logs, my travel visa stamp, a scanned copy of the customs declaration, and the internal Hyperion memo noting my overseas consultation. Every digital and physical trail confirmed I was in Switzerland when that document was allegedly signed by me in Florida. Every timestamp lined up. Every variable cross-verified. The paper trail was airtight. I looked at Ryan and nodded once. We didn't need to say anything else. The moment had arrived. The lines were drawn. And there was no walking it back. After everything I had gathered, the stolen patent, the forged filings, the falsified signatures, and the golden email tying Aiden directly to the fraud, there was still one element missing, the final hinge that would move this from incontrovertible digital evidence into a case strong enough to trigger formal legal action. As clean as the data was, prosecutors always wanted a human voice, someone on the inside who could tie the facts to decisions, intentions, and context. Someone who had been there. Someone who could speak to the planning, the knowledge, and the execution. That meant finding Blair Monroe. She had disappeared from Orion AI's online presence months ago. No mention in recent company updates, no visibility in press materials or investor calls. A buried name in the organizational chart. That was the first clue. I checked her employee record again in the cache of internal documents I had extracted, and sure enough, her termination was timestamped just 2 weeks after the Series A funds cleared. No thank you email. No severance memo. Nothing. It was a clean erasure, the kind of removal you execute when you need to bury a trail before it leads anywhere dangerous. She had been the perfect scapegoat, useful while the fraud was being carried out, disposable the moment it was time to cover tracks. I switched tactics and looked for her under non-corporate profiles. I found her LinkedIn within 15 minutes, under a slightly different name format, Blair M. instead of Blair Monroe, her title updated to a vague operations consultant with no listed company affiliation. A digital ghost trying to avoid search results. But the photo was the same. She hadn't changed much, still the same sharp cheekbones, blunt haircut, neutral expression with eyes that looked a little more guarded now. I didn't message her directly. That would have been reckless. Instead, I used a secure contact method we employed at Hyperion for whistleblower outreach, encrypted relay channels routed through anonymous nodes, disguised as innocuous organizational emails. It allowed the recipient to opt in before revealing any personal contact details. I drafted the message carefully, including 3 very specific identifiers from the email thread, her original response timed down to the minute, the name of the file directory where she stored the forged documents, and a single quote from her message that only she would recognize. I didn't expect a reply the same day. But 6 hours later, the relay pinged green. She responded. The message was short, I know what you're talking about. They threw me under the bus. I'm willing to talk, but only if we go through legal. I set up a call through Hyperion's legal counsel, who had been looped in once Ryan and I compiled the initial report. The meeting was held via a secured, non-recorded line with in-house counsel present on both sides. Blair joined with her camera off, her voice low but composed. There was no hesitation in how she spoke. She walked us through everything, how Aiden had instructed her to fabricate the patent paperwork, how he'd provided her with copies of my signature, old professional photos, and even timestamps for fake submission records. She described how he had told her I was in on it, though she admitted she always had doubts about that. But she'd followed orders because she thought it was just temporary, something to make the company look more mature to investors until they found a real CTO. But the part that mattered most, the keystone, was this: she explicitly stated that Aiden gave the command to use my credentials knowing I was abroad. He told her to spoof the location metadata to Miami because, in his words, she's buried in some Euro lab with no cell signal, she won't even know what happened. That quote, repeated verbatim by Blair, matched the attitude in his email and left no question about intent. She was also willing to testify under oath, provided she received limited immunity in exchange for cooperation, something our legal team assured her was possible, given her early termination and clear subordinate status. Her testimony, combined with the trove of digital evidence I had compiled, the forged source code, manipulated signatures, internal Slack messages, fake employment history, and patent theft, built a case so comprehensive it was practically surgical. But what truly sealed it, beyond the technical documentation and insider corroboration, was my own alibi, the undeniable proof that I had been 4,800 miles away, inside a signal-shielded data facility in Zurich, during the exact hours the documents were filed in my name. The timestamps couldn't be argued with. The badge logs, the travel records, the lack of internet access, all confirmed I physically could not have submitted anything from Miami, as the documents falsely claimed. When we presented the final package to our external legal partner, a firm with deep ties to federal cybersecurity enforcement, they didn't need to ask if the evidence was authentic. They asked how fast we wanted to move. And just like that, the entire structure Aiden had built, the lie, the face, the fraud, began to collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. The ballroom was at full tilt when I returned, late enough in the evening that the alcohol had dulled inhibitions and the music had softened into a background hum behind the rising volume of small talk and staged laughter. The same chandelier glared down at the crowd, casting its golden light across people who still wore their high school personas like second skins. I moved through them like a shadow, my face calm, my posture deliberate. Every step I took toward the stage felt like it carried the weight of 1,000 versions of myself, the girl who was mocked in the robotics lab, the woman who built neural inference systems from scratch, the daughter whose family decided she was expendable, and now, the engineer with the power to shatter the illusion they had all bought into. Aiden was still holding court on the stage, drink in hand, wearing that smug, magnetic grin that had always been his currency. He was mid-toast, standing beneath a massive screen now looping the reunion's logo and some slideshow of smiling faces and old yearbook photos. To the dreamers, he declared, his voice amplified across the hall, and to everyone who made it out of this town and did something real. You know who you are. A ripple of applause followed. He raised his glass, soaking in the moment, drunk on more than whiskey. That was my cue. I stepped forward without a word, climbed the short staircase to the stage, and approached the AV rack near the projector. No one tried to stop me, not even Aiden, who was too wrapped in his performance to notice the matte black drive in my hand until it was already plugged into the control port. The screen flickered. The logo vanished. Silence swept across the room like a pressure wave, sudden and absolute. The first slide appeared, stark and undeniable, a side-by-side comparison of the stolen code and the original patent draft, with key sections highlighted, same function structures, same data tree logic, even the original typo still intact. Above it, the Orion AI logo was displayed in watermark form, an echo of the lie now publicly collapsing. Whispers broke out across the crowd. Some people leaned forward. Others turned to each other with furrowed brows. Aiden lowered his glass slowly, confusion beginning to spread across his face. The second slide replaced the first. The email. His email. The one he had sent to Blair, ordering her to use my signature, forge the submission, mask the location metadata to show Miami. The timestamp was clear. The language was unmistakable. And just below it, in smaller font, her confirmation reply, proof that the order was carried out, and that he had known exactly what he was doing. Aiden's mouth opened, then closed. He took one step forward, and I saw the first glint of panic in his eyes, not annoyance, not irritation, but fear. Before he could speak, the third slide came up. My Zurich security log. Dated, timestamped, verified. Entry scans, badge-in confirmations, biometric logs from the cold data facility. The location, Zurich, Switzerland. The time, June 9th. The exact moment when the documents had allegedly been signed by me from a Miami IP address. The ballroom erupted, not into cheers, not into anger, but into stunned, breathless disbelief. I heard someone gasp out loud near the center tables. A woman whispered, "Oh my God," while someone else started filming with their phone, as if this were just the latest twist in a prestige drama rather than a live federal crime unspooling in real time. Aiden lunged toward the projector, his voice rising into a panicked bark. This is fake, it's all fake. This is some twisted joke. He didn't finish. The double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open in perfect synchronicity. 2 agents stepped in first, black suits, no hesitation. Behind them came 3 more, one already reaching into his inner pocket, the other scanning the crowd with practiced detachment. The room split down the middle in a wave of confusion and retreat as the agents made a direct line for the stage. Aiden turned to run. He didn't make it halfway down the steps before the lead agent called his name, full name, no hesitation, and announced himself with a tone that could cut through steel. Aiden Carter. Federal agents. Don't move. He froze, hands half raised, the glass still trembling in his fingers. One of the agents approached calmly, read him his rights, and slipped a pair of cuffs over his wrists with quiet efficiency. Aiden tried to protest, but the words collapsed into noise, a mixture of denial and disbelief, the sound of someone watching the floor vanish beneath their feet. I stood off to the side of the stage, unmoving, as they led him through the stunned crowd. I watched people part to let them through, former classmates, old friends, people who had laughed along with his jokes just an hour earlier. Not one of them said a word in his defense. And in that final moment, when he passed me in cuffs, our eyes met. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The room had fallen into a surreal, suspended silence, the kind that follows a detonation you didn't hear but can feel deep in your bones. The FBI agents, methodical and composed, cut through the crowd with the quiet authority of people who do not ask for space, they create it. There was no shouting, no drawn weapons, no dramatic standoff. Just cold, practiced efficiency. Every pair of eyes in the ballroom tracked them, some people frozen mid-step, others whispering frantically behind their hands, trying to process the surreal shift from nostalgia to federal arrest. Aiden didn't move when they reached him. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, for backup, for someone, anyone, to intervene. But no one moved. His polished grin, the one he wore like armor, cracked the moment the lead agent spoke. Aiden Carter, you're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. The words hit the air like a gavel. The weight of each charge hung there, not dramatic, not shouted, but stated with quiet finality. The effect was devastating. His expression faltered instantly. The confidence that had carried him through the evening, the raised glass, the cruel jokes, the charisma he wore like a tailored suit, vanished in seconds. His features contorted as the reality set in, that this wasn't just a misunderstanding or a technicality he could lie his way out of. This was real. The handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists with an audible click, the final punctuation to a collapse years in the making. I watched as he instinctively opened his mouth to argue, maybe to beg, maybe to say my name in some desperate plea, but no sound came out. He looked smaller now, dwarfed by the presence of the agents and the harsh clarity of the overhead lights. The posture that had once made him the center of every room slumped as they took hold of his arms and began walking him through the ballroom, the quiet murmur of the crowd shifting into something darker, disbelief laced with recognition. People began piecing together the truth in real time, the fake patents, the forged identity, the stolen research, the fraud that had touched millions in funding and jeopardized federal security. He turned his head once as they passed the stage, scanning the crowd again, looking for a familiar face to anchor to. And when he saw me, standing still, expression locked and unreadable, his eyes widened. For the briefest moment, I saw it all reflected there, the panic, the humiliation, the disbelief that I had done what he never thought I would. That I had not only fought back, but dismantled his empire in full view of the very people he had once convinced he was untouchable. I said nothing. I didn't flinch. And I didn't look away. I stood at the edge of the stage as they led him down the aisle, past the stunned crowd, his shoulders hunched now, head low, the cuffs catching the light like twin exclamation points. People moved instinctively to make room, some too stunned to speak, others watching through the screens of their phones. Somewhere behind me, the slideshow loop resumed for a moment before someone thought to turn it off. And then I saw them, my parents. They stood near the back wall, half shielded by a row of decorative palms, their expressions frozen in something between horror and disbelief. My mother's mouth was slightly open, as if she had just begun to say something and then realized she had nothing left to offer. My father stood beside her, arms stiff at his sides, his jaw locked tight, the flush creeping up his neck betraying the fury he didn't yet know where to aim. I didn't pause. I didn't slow down. As Aiden was escorted out through the main doors, I stepped down from the stage and walked straight past them, my heels striking the marble floor with precise, deliberate rhythm. I didn't look at them. Not because I didn't want to, but because there was nothing left to see. They had made their choice long before tonight. They had chosen silence. They had chosen loyalty to the wrong child. They had asked me to lie, to bury the truth, to sacrifice my name so that Aiden could keep the illusion alive. And now that illusion had shattered in front of an entire room, under the light of a federal badge and an undeniable chain of evidence. I walked past them with the clarity of someone who had burned every bridge that led back to the place where she was small, and afraid, and alone. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their apology. I had something far more powerful. The truth, spoken out loud, proven, undeniable, and a future that was finally mine alone. The moment I stepped outside the ballroom, the cool night air hit me like a wall, sharp, cutting, sobering in a way nothing else could be. The chaos inside, the hushed gasps, the agents, the unraveling of Aiden's carefully constructed image, it all dimmed as the door clicked shut behind me. For the first time in hours, I could hear myself think. I walked toward the edge of the hotel's valet circle, trying to collect the steady rhythm of my breath, but I didn't even make it to the curb before I heard footsteps behind me, too fast, too familiar. Emily, my father called out, firm and cold, like he had something urgent to deliver, like I owed him one more moment of my time. I didn't turn around, but he stepped in front of me, blocking my path, his face rigid with that same forced composure he always wore when he wanted to seem like he was in control. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge what had just happened in that ballroom. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a plain white envelope. He held it out to me like it was some reasonable offer, like he was handing me a contract or a favor or a key to a life I was supposed to want. "There's 200,000 in here," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder as if someone might overhear. "All wired into an account we opened in your name. No questions asked. All you have to do is tell the agents you were aware of Aiden's filings, that you gave him permission to use your research and credentials. If you say it was a misunderstanding, they'll cut the charges down to nothing. They'll make it go away." I stared at him in silence. Not because I was shocked by the money, I wasn't, but because he had reduced everything, years of work and betrayal and theft, to a transaction. As if I could be bought. As if my identity, my integrity, my future were something he could purchase with 6 figures and a lie. Then I heard her. My mother. She had followed, but slower, eyes already red, mascara smeared from crying, her hands clutched around the strap of her handbag like it might hold her together. She came up beside him and stepped closer to me, her voice already breaking. "Please," she said through her tears. "Please don't let this destroy the family. He's your brother. We're your parents. You can fix this. We just need you to say the words." My father said nothing. He just kept holding out the envelope, his hand steady, like he was waiting for a business deal to be signed. That was when it hit me, with absolute clarity. They weren't horrified because Aiden had committed crimes. They weren't ashamed because I had been used. They weren't even upset about the collapse of the fraud itself. They were only afraid because it was public. Because it was real. Because there were consequences now, and for the first time, they couldn't control the narrative. They didn't care about the damage done to me. They cared about the stain on the family name. I looked my mother dead in the eyes. "You think you're victims in this. But you're not. You're not collateral damage. You're not innocent. You knew what he did. You defended it. You enabled it." I turned to my father. "And you really thought I'd take your money? After everything? After you watched him steal from me, my name, my work, my life, and told me to shut up about it?" His jaw clenched. He said nothing. Just stood there, still holding out the envelope, as if the silence was a tactic. I took one step back and stared at both of them, letting the finality of it settle between us like a wall. "You're not family anymore. You're accessories. And I am done." My mother's face crumpled completely. She reached for my arm. "Emily, please." I pulled away before her fingers could touch me. "No contact," I said, my voice even. "Not in a month. Not in a year. Not after sentencing. Not ever." I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing against the concrete, not once looking back. Not to see if my father was still holding the envelope. Not to see if my mother had collapsed into sobs behind me. They weren't my concern anymore. They had made their choice. And I had finally made mine. 2 months later, the courtroom was silent as the final verdict was read aloud. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I didn't flinch. I sat in the gallery, hands folded in my lap, watching Aiden as he stood in the defendant's box in a suit that no longer fit right, shoulders slumped, the bags under his eyes heavy with sleepless nights and the slow, suffocating weight of consequences he had never imagined would touch him. He didn't look at me, not once during the entire trial. Not when Blair took the stand and recounted exactly how he instructed her to forge my signature. Not when the prosecution projected the email onto the courtroom screen, line by line, word for word. Not even when the Zurich logs were entered into evidence, showing with clinical precision that I was thousands of miles away when the crimes he committed were attributed to me. The jury had taken less than 3 hours to deliberate. He was convicted on all counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit both. The sentencing phase was scheduled for a later date, but the conviction alone guaranteed years in federal prison. There was no deal. No escape. No charming his way out of it. Just the reality he had built for himself, brick by brick, with every lie, every forgery, every betrayal. And now he would live in it. I left the courthouse alone that day, stepping into the overcast afternoon without saying a word to the reporters crowding near the exit. I didn't owe them anything. I had already said everything I needed to, in code, in documents, in evidence, in silence. The truth had done what it needed to do. My promotion went through 2 weeks later. Senior Director of Applied AI Infrastructure, a title I had earned not through politics or favors, but through years of work no one had seen until it mattered most. The review panel didn't ask me about the trial. They didn't have to. My record spoke louder than any courtroom drama could. I signed the contract in my new office, the one overlooking the lake just beyond Hyperion's research campus, and left the building that day knowing I had crossed a threshold I would never return from. I moved into a quiet home just outside the city, a place surrounded by trees, where the windows stayed open and the air was clean and still. It wasn't grand or extravagant. It was mine. No noise. No echoes of old expectations. No reminders of who I used to be, or who I was supposed to be for other people. I furnished it slowly, carefully. Not to impress anyone, but to feel rooted. Safe. Free. I cut all ties. No more strained texts from my mother, trying to open conversations with guilt. No more voicemails from my father, alternating between denial and cold fury. No cousins. No holiday cards. I deleted the old group threads. I changed my number. The door was shut, locked, and bolted, not out of vengeance, but necessity. Peace had a cost. I paid it gladly. And Ryan, the one person who never wavered, stayed. Through every late-night forensic review, every legal meeting, every difficult hour when the weight of it all threatened to crush me from the inside out, he never once treated me like I was broken or fragile. He didn't try to rescue me. He stood beside me, exactly where I needed him to be. Eventually, something shifted. We went from code reviews and case prep to quiet dinners and shared silences that didn't need to be filled. It wasn't a whirlwind or a cliché. It was slow. Earned. Built on trust and exhaustion and the calm that follows a long, brutal storm. He knew exactly who I was, where I had been, and what it had cost me. And he stayed anyway. In the end, my revenge wasn't about watching Aiden fall. It wasn't about proving anything to my parents or reclaiming stolen recognition. It wasn't about bitterness or rage. It was about walking away with everything they said I would never have: dignity, autonomy, truth. It was about being able to live my life without fear, without lies, without shrinking to make others feel comfortable. It was the quiet of my own home. The ability to rest. The safety of knowing no one could take anything from me ever again. That was the real revenge. It wasn't destruction. It was freedom.